You are listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and I am joined today by Matthias Roberts from Seattle. Matthias, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you, Adam. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. You're here today to talk about a book that you've published. It's your second book, actually, and this one is called Holy Runaways: Rediscovering Faith After Being Burned by Religion. What a title. So before we get into the book, can you just share a little bit about kind of who you are, where you live? I already said Seattle, what you spend your time doing.
Yeah, I consider myself primarily a therapist. That is my day job. It's what I love to do. Kind of consider that my primary vocation. Specialize in working with religious trauma, spiritual trauma, but also do a lot of work with LGBTQ folks. And to that end, that's kind of where my writing centers, although not exclusively so, but trying to help queer folks or people who have been kind of cast out by their faith communities find healing, find wholeness. Done a lot of work with the Allender Center. That's how we met. We were in externship together and have been a facilitator there.
So let's talk about this word runaway, holy runaways. We're going to get to the word holy in a minute, but first let's just talk about a runaway. What do you mean by a runaway?
I think what comes to mind for me first, and I imagine for many people, is just that image of like running away from home. I open with stories in the book around when I ran away from home when I was a kid. It's just like that need to get away from a place because we're dissatisfied with it. So that is a primary meaning, but I also think about the ways that, I think as we get older, we fully run away. Like my runaway attempts as a kid, I always returned back home. But I've had many experiences of where I have had to run away from a place that felt safe at one time, or maybe never did feel safe, but needed to get away from a place. And so when I think runaway, I think of people who have left something.
In the introduction, you talk more about some of the runaways you've encountered. And I just want to read, here's how you put it. You say, so many people that I know are in this in-between running away place when it comes to their faith. So many of my clients, you're a therapist, you're talking about your clients, so many of my clients are wrestling with questions that in one way or another amount to, how do we find our home again? And then you say this, and here's where you get the word holy in the title. You say, I think we are more than just confused, fearful, or misguided runaways. I think we are holy. Can you say more about why you think there is a holiness to running away?
One, I think there's issues of integrity at stake. Like I think often for many of us who have run away from a place, something doesn't sit well within us. And so running away is an act of often alignment with what we want to live into.
One of the things I'm hearing you say with the word alignment is that if I'm part of a community where I'm no longer resonating with what that community culture is, it's an act of integrity at times, not always, but at times, it's an act of integrity to leave. And maybe to say it a little bit more accurately, it would be a lack of integrity to stay because at some level, I'm not being true to me. Am I hearing you right there?
Yes, yeah. And I think there's, a massive amount of discernment that can come into that choice. But yes, primarily I think it's that. And I think especially in a lot of our faith communities right now, there are many people, myself included, where we're noticing something is wrong, where we have this feeling something is wrong here. This is not the way things are supposed to be. And I think of course, there's virtue for staying in a community, working within a community to find change. There absolutely is. But other times, I think we need to know when to get out. We need to know that it is actually time to leave this place, shake the dust off our feet, and find something somewhere else.
And you talk about this in the book, but let me just say at the outset, it is incredibly hard emotionally to leave a community in which you either formerly belonged or at some level still do have a sense of belongingness. Like, that's a hard thing to do. And you share rather autobiographically in this book about how you have discerned at different points in time in your life to leave, to leave, to go in a different direction. And in that sense, you're self-identifying as a runaway, and you are, I think, accurately saying there's something holy about that. When you live in alignment with your own heart, and you have to leave a community because you no longer fit there. There's something of integrity in that decision.
Yes.
Before we get into the nuts and bolts of this book, I just want to give you an opportunity to say a little bit about, like, what's your hope for the reader? Like, what are you wanting to happen for someone as they read Holy Runaways?
I wondered this a lot as I started writing this book. And the thing that I really arrived at was the word companionship. I really want this book to be a companion to people who are trying to discern, who already have discerned, who are maybe well past the runaway point, who've maybe integrated into new communities but are still trying to make sense of what happened. Like I hope this book acts as a companion and helps people wrap language around what actually happened or what is happening in the midst of this process of a lot of people I think use the word like deconstruction, and I don't love that word, because it's a popular kind of understanding of this idea. Like in the midst of that deconstruction journey, I hope it's companionship.
Mhm. And deconstruction, that might be an apt term to describe what happens intellectually
Yeah,
for us,
right.
but emotionally, it's gut wrenching to leave a community of which you are a part.
Mhm.
And what I'm hearing you say is that you want to be with people that are in that emotional gut wrenching experience through this book.
Yes. How can I come alongside you? How can you find other people to come alongside you to figure out what you need to do? So try really hard not to be prescriptive in the book. I certainly share a lot of ideas and thoughts, but very much the sense of how do you actually discern for yourself what it means to step into a new community or to leave a former community?
There's a chapter early in the book that I love called Cracks, and it is a deeply autobiographical chapter about you as a college student. And the setting for the chapter is Matthias sitting in chapel as a college student at a Christian university. And will you just recount what happened that day as the president of the university spoke at chapel?
The president gets up on the chapel stage and is talking about his vision for us as students, but also kind of as a Christian community when it came to this really hot topic issue, which was LGBT people. And he started asking us to think about the way that we used the language of gay. Like I think that this was like, early 2010s. And that word gay, was often used as kind of slur, like that's so gay, like to mean something bad. And he said, we have so many people on our campus who likely struggle with same-sex attraction, and using this language in derogatory ways isn't supporting our siblings in Christ. And then he went to reaffirm, the university's official position on LGBT relationships, which is that there can't be any. I had to stay celibate. And everyone around me started to cheer. And
Mhm.
I'm sitting there as someone who was gay, who was trying to figure out how to live within community. And all these people started cheering when he said, we can be the kind of community that will help our siblings who struggle with this on their difficult journey of being single. And to me, it felt like they were cheering for my loneliness. everyone around me, these couple thousand people, were like applauding and cheering for their ability to help me slightly feel better about being lonely for the rest of my life. And
Mhm.
something in me began to crack.
And what you write right after you're saying that something in me cracked was, I had the urge to run away. And then you say this, I didn't pack my bags or drop out, but those cheers began to reverberate inside me, making me wonder if I actually belonged. Ooh, boy. So let's start with this. What was it like for you as the cheers are going? Like, what was that like for you as a whatever, 20 something year old, 20-year old?
I didn't cheer. I didn't join in. I was sitting next to my best friend at the time, and I remember he started clapping. He was one of the first and only people that I had even told at that time that I
Mhm.
had these feelings. I think my felt experience at the time was one of confusion and pain, but I don't know that I would have been able to tell you that in that moment. Like I think there was a sense of like, okay, I can do this. I can
Mhm.
remain celibate for the rest of my life. Like that's what I'm supposed to do. But deep within was a sense of like all of these people are essentially like patting me on the head, telling me we're here for you without any understanding of what they were actually asking me to do. It felt way more like sobering and serious than the cheering.
In this moment, there is a rupture, we could say, of belonging for you.
Mm.
You're still a student, you're a Christian, God's deeply important to you. You belong, and yet you're not clapping, and everyone knows that. What is it about belonging that is so important to our nervous systems?
It's that feeling of these people can actually see me and love me for who I am in my fullness, not needing me to be something different in order to be able to receive that. I think the message that was coming through at that time and many other times was in order to belong in this community, you have to change something about yourself, or you cannot fully express part of yourself. And that was a terror that was so deep. But those cheers didn't give me any sense that they actually saw me.
Yeah. So there's a profound lack of empathy in that moment. And I think what's so excruciating about the moment for me as a straight man thinking about it is it's all under the guise of we are loving and we're trying, we don't want to use gay as a slur.
Mhm.
We are embracing, we are welcoming, right? Like we want to bring the love of Christ. It's under that guise that the cheers erupt.
Yes.
What was that part of it like for you?
It felt like a familiar slap in the face. We love you, but like I mean, all of these conditions that were being applied of like, or you have to affirm back to us that we are loving you the way you should be loved, but it's on our terms, right? Like they get to decide what's loving. I don't. I don't get to protest.
And that's just such an important sentence. They get to decide what's loving. Anytime we're in that realm, whether I could care less if it's sexuality or something else, anytime we're in the realm of the other person getting to decide whether it's loving, we are right up against the edge of, I would say, spiritual abuse and toxicity, danger, because your voice in that moment is being dismissed. Or, as you put it, your protest, it's being dismissed. And you have countless experiences of that protest being dismissed.
And not just dismissed, but telling me that my experience of this not feeling like love is wrong. Like that there's something wrong with me for I mean, there's a gaslighting in there and in the actual definition of what gaslighting means. Like I'm the one who's wrong here because I'm not experiencing it as love.
Right. If you don't feel my love for you, there's got to be something wrong with you because I am loving you in a Christ-like way.
Yes. Right.
That's crazy making.
Mhm.
You come to start seeing a therapist that you write about in this book named Solomon. I don't know if that's real name or not, doesn't matter. But there's a chapter where you talk about Solomon. It's called
Mhm.
Trust. And this chapter begins with you recounting how a recent breakup, you've just had a breakup, and it has forced you to grapple with how much emotional pain like you're carrying around in your body, not from the breakup, but from your growing up years. That's what
Mhm.
this chapter is about. And you tell us about how Solomon, your therapist, points out that you're coming into therapy week in and week out and you're focusing on the present breakup. And this is what Solomon says, because it was easier than looking at the pain you had stuffed down and ignored over a lifetime. Can you say more about this very human tendency to focus on present day difficulties as a way of avoiding deeper pain from our past? Because I don't think it's unique to you.
It wasn't conscious. It was like, I think that's important to say from the get go. Like, it was not a conscious choice to try. My experience of it was, why does this breakup hurt so much? Like, it was my first relationship. We hadn't been dating for super long. But this breakup was like, it threw me into the deep end. Like, I couldn't get out of bed, and there was a part of me that felt like, this feels overblown. The pain that I'm experiencing from this feels like so much more than what this breakup would quote unquote warrant. And Solomon first helped me kind of sit with the sense of, can we acknowledge the fullness of your pain? Like, can we not try to
Mm,
push that aside and say, like, this breakup shouldn't hurt this much? But it was over the course of then the next few months that slowly and gently he started introducing this idea that maybe you're feeling the pain of something far, far, far more than
mhm.
just this breakup. And I think I see this with my clients all the time too. I think there can be a point or many points in our lives where we have an experience that almost wakes us up to our pain. Like, we're functioning well enough, pushing it down well enough, that we need something kind of big to push us into the pain. And then once we actually acknowledge it, if we acknowledge it, it then opens all those other doors too. And I think that's what was happening for me. All of this unprocessed pain just started flooding out and getting filtered through the lens of this breakup. And my therapist had to then sort that out and say, yeah, sure, there's pain here from the breakup, but we have your parents, we have the churches, we have stuff at college, we've all of these other places of much deeper pain.
And your body was telling you that. Like you knew in your body that there's something disproportionate. Breakups are excruciating, but you knew in your body that there was something disproportionate about what you were feeling inside and the event in the present, namely the breakup.
Yeah, right.
And so you tell us in this chapter one of the primary reasons that you were reluctant to talk to Solomon about your past. And here's how you put it. You say, when in the past I'd shared my pain with the people closest to me, the ones who were supposed to care, I watched their faces turn to stone. Whew. Can you say more about what that was like for you? Because I think it's a common experience. I think very often when we risk being vulnerable with someone, when we're in a place of desperation, a place of need, when we reach for help, very often in that moment, the other person doesn't know what to do with us.
Mhm.
What was that like for you, Matthias? The faces turning to stone, the being met with, I don't know what to do with you.
I think it made me shut down to my own pain. Before I moved to Seattle, I was not a person who really ever cried, nor did I ever get angry. And I remember walking into my therapist's office for like the first ever session and telling that to him. I think those two things are directly related. That reality of bringing my pain to a variety of different people. Sure, my parents are in here, yes, but there are many, many, many other people too. I think especially around what we've been talking around with my sexuality. Not just that at all, not just that, but that's those stone faces of, we're not going to attune to you. We're going to tell you the quote unquote truth, made me stuff down any reaction, any pain, any anger, and learn to cope in other ways. I wasn't aware of any of that at the time. I thought I was just a pretty happy-go-lucky guy.
Can't cry, can't be angry. I think it's just such a practical barometer for listeners to kind of just take an inventory and say, do I cry on a regular basis? And do I experience and express anger on a regular basis?
Mhm.
And if the answer to either of those questions is no, you might want to get some therapeutic help. There's a reason for that. I mean, that's what I want to say. You're not broken. There's a reason for that. And in this book, you put some language to that, to the reasoning why you had pushed down sorrow and grief and anger. The chapter shifts and you begin to talk about a paradox. You begin to talk about what happens when all of a sudden care, genuine, good care is suddenly available, i.e., in the person of Solomon. When someone's face doesn't turn to stone, when they're present with you, when they're truly listening to you, attuned to you. And here's what you write. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to quote it. This highlights one of the most difficult paradoxes of a runaway's journey. We set out to find where we can be cared for and care for others, but receiving and learning how to rest in that care is incredibly difficult and sometimes impossible when we've experienced trauma. Good care often exposes the places in our lives that haven't been tended. Our wounds sometimes hurt more after they receive attention. It's just such a good paragraph. Let's just talk some more about this, Matthias. Why is it hard to receive good care when it is right in front of us and we so deeply long for it?
Because it's exposing. Like I said there, like it exposes all of the places where we didn't get care. So for us to start to receive care, to actually be able to lean into care, we also have to reckon with the grief of all of the other times we haven't been cared for. And that can be so painful, is so painful. It's often easier to reject the care, to be cynical about the care, to push away care because of what it opens up within us, which is grief and again anger. Like we have to be able to work with all of those things. And I think it's really important for me to say here, this breakup I think happened, I'd been seeing Solomon 4 years at this point. Like, so we had 4 years of care, 4 years of development and learning how to trust, and I still was resistant to opening this up to him.
And what I want the listeners to hear is there's a reason for that.
Mhm.
There's always a reason for our quote unquote resistance or our guardedness. It is not simply that you're closed. You
Yes.
had 4 years of learning to trust this man, seeing what he was made of, seeing what he would do with you, how he engaged with you. And yet, you had a nervous system that had so many experiences of not being well cared for, that
Mhm.
when Solomon was giving you an alternative experience, you were my guess is you were both suspicious and you felt raw because you were getting a taste of what your brain and nervous system had needed for years and had not experienced very much of. And he was giving you a taste of it.
Yes. Yeah. And so hard to trust. Yeah, I feel some emotion even coming up as I'm thinking about it. Like there's it both felt so good and so scary because I think there was a hypervigilance there of when is this care going to go away? When is he going to turn to stone? And I'm going to be left alone again with all these awakened feelings that then I'm going to have to find something to do with
Hmm.
when, they already had a place. Putting them back in that place is really hard.
Right. Right. I think my favorite chapter is titled Alone. It's a deeply vulnerable chapter. A lot of the book is vulnerable. And this chapter narrates your personal experience with grief that you had been holding inside for a very long time. And I want to read a section from this chapter. You say that it's a couple years after your big breakup. You're talking with Solomon. Continue working with Solomon, and Solomon says, "I think we keep bumping into something deep, a place you're not able to go. Do you feel that too?" And you say, "I did." And I had been feeling it. This is you speaking. I'd been feeling it for a while. Sometimes in the middle of a session with Solomon, I would feel my stomach knot and my hands clench tight. These moments of resistance happened when Solomon tried to connect something I was experiencing in my current life with something from my past. There's that theme again. And finally, when Solomon asked, "Do you feel that too?" I knew we were thinking the same thing, and I whispered the answer: "It's grief." Solomon nodded. I immediately seized up as usual. And then you say, "I'm sorry, but I don't want to go there." And this is how Solomon responds to you: "Grief and sadness have never been safe for you, Matthias. You're going to need a lot of safety to be able to experience the deeper levels of grief you contain." What's it like for you now as I read those words to you?
Again, I feel my emotion bubbling. It could, and it still feels true. Like I mean, there has been so much healing since that moment, and it is ongoing, and so there's a sense of deep gratitude for Solomon's, I think, wisdom in that moment to not try to push into that grief. He never tried to push me into it, but to actually put language around what was happening, which was, it's not safe for me to grieve. I think since then it has become safer for me to grieve,
Mhm.
but there is also still a yearning, and I think that's what maybe some of this emotion is that yearning for more safety.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you write in this chapter, what you say to Solomon is that you have this sense that, okay, if I start to open some of this up and feel it with you, Solomon, like 50 minutes and we're done, right?
Mhm.
And you're going to be alone in that the rest of your day and week.
Yeah.
And so what you realized for you was that you needed to find somebody that could do like some intensive work with you and be with you on a regular basis for an extended period of time, not just a normal 50-minute hour. And you find her and you call her Alice. You meet with Alice. And I just want to recount this part of the book. Over the course of the day, your day with Alice, we moved deeper into memories. So you're engaging some of your past. You sat on the couch. You started to do work around the time when you first came out to your parents. I talked about how they treated me in those conversations, and afterward, suddenly blurting out, "I just feel so alone, so abandoned." You find language in that moment for something that you have felt in your body for years, but you verbalize it. And Alice responds by saying, "You are alone," with kindness and empathy in her eyes. She says, "You are alone." You begin to weep. This is what you write. Alice's words weren't meant to be cruel, just truthful. Their simplicity touched on something I had felt for so long, but had never been able to admit, even to myself. I had tried for over a decade to get my childhood community to reopen their arms to me. And more important, I was still striving to get my parents to embrace me, to reassemble our family. I was still hoping that what felt like abandonment was only temporary. And then last part, Alice's simple words exposed the futility of all those hopes. Alice was right. I was alone.
Mhm.
And now you're face to face with your grief. because the truth of the heartbreak of your story had been named with precision and you were feeling it. Yes?
Yes.
What was it like for you when Alice named how alone you were in your family?
I was hit with something. It felt like truth, it felt like grief, it felt like relief. Those words, "You are alone." It suddenly, like, reoriented so many things, and I saw how hard I had been trying, again, I think on a more unconscious level, to avoid that fact.
Mhm.
To say, "No, my parents, all of these other people were with me," because that's what they always told me. "No, we're with you. We love you. We wanna be alongside you. We're in this with you." But that was never my experience, even though I don't think I really knew it wasn't my experience, but I felt it deeply. And for her to say, "You are alone," all of a sudden was like, "Oh, yes, I have been alone this whole time. And now I can learn how to not be alone." Even in writing all of this, I still haven't found all the language for what happened in that moment.
Well, as you're talking, I flash back. I think of the title of the book, Holy Runaways, and I flash back to myself as a sophomore in high school. And I jumped on my 10 speed and I ran away. I biked to Danbury Fair Mall, which was a 20-minute drive from my house. I don't know how long the bike ride was. And I went into this, it was like a hi-fi sound store called Tweeter. And I sat in front of the TVs from after school when I biked there until 9 p.m. when the store closed and they called the police and, returned me to my parents. But I was alone in my family and I didn't know it. I
Yeah,
didn't know what I was running away from. And you were alone in your family, but a 14, 15, 16-year old can't let in what Alice said to you.
right.
You were alone, Matthias.
Mhm.
And so that is so the nature of being alone when we're in our families of origin is you don't know that you are alone by definition.
Yeah,
And your grief, all that grief that you and Solomon kept bumping up against, was deeply about your aloneness in your family. How does that relate to Holy Runaways?
I think for each of us, if we are going to find a way through pain into new community, we have to move through pain. We have to actually reckon with what happened. That I think that's the only way that we will then be able to be freed up to not repeat the misattunement. Like there's so many stories in this book of the ways I kept trying to find a new community, and it continued to be repetition of what had happened within my family, within my early years with churches, within the college. Being able to understand our pain and have our pain attuned to then allows us to move into different ways of being, to be able to find communities where we can become attuned to,
Mhm.
or in more common language, loved. We can move into places where we are loved. And so that, I mean, that's kind of the core part of the book, is to rediscover faith even. And I realize we haven't talked a whole lot about faith, but it's all tied in here. uh, we have to reckon with our pain.
Yeah, there's a theme in the book that your heart is for people to find a faith in God that resonates with their integrity, with who they
Mhm.
are.
Yes.
You don't seem to have any interest in deconstruction as an end in itself.
No. Uh-uh.
And through the process of running away, you have found a faith that feels more true to who you are. Is that
Mhm.
fair?
Mhm.
And not just a faith as a belief system, but a community of people that you
Yes.
can worship with.
Mhm.
That's what Dan Siegel, the neuroscientist that I like so much, calls integration. It's
Mhm.
what the Old Testament calls shalom. And I'm sure that if you looked in the mirror now versus as like a 20-year-old, like your face has more shalom in it. You have more wholeness and integration in your being and in your relationships.
Mhm.
But it's come at such a high cost.
Yeah. Just the other day, how Facebook just, throws up photos from 10 years ago or whatever. One of those came up. And I was looking at myself and then flipping through photos and seeing that I'd never really noticed that I had a pretty consistent expression for photos where I would have this like giant, like mouth open kind of smile. And I saw everything that was held back. Again, didn't know it at the time, didn't have any awareness, but I'm like, that doesn't look like me. It's not the me that I know today. That was a me who was very disconnected.
Matthias, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for creating this piece of art in the world.
Mm,
And if people want to find out more about you or get connected to you, how can they do that?
yeah, I'm across the internet at Matthias Roberts. Um, Book is available on October 3rd, wherever you buy books.
Thanks, Matthias.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you, Adam.